Remember when Dad always had the right answer, the kids actually listened, and every problem in life could be solved with a calm talk in the living room? That was Father Knows Best. Airing from 1954 to 1960 across CBS and NBC, the show starred Robert Young, Jane Wyatt, Elinor Donahue, Billy Gray, and Lauren Chapin. And for 6 seasons, the Anderson family became the gold standard of what American home life was supposed to look like. But behind that picture-perfect suburban address was a story that was a lot messier and a lot weirder than anything Jim Anderson ever sorted out before the credits rolled. Lost episodes, Cold War propaganda, real-life struggles that no amount of fatherly wisdom could fix. Today we're counting down 15 weird facts about Father Knows Best, and stick around for number 1 because what finally ended this show isn't what you'd expect. Before we get started, hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss more retro deep dives like this one. And let us know in the comments, do you remember watching this one live or did reruns introduce you to the Andersons? Now, let's head to 607 South Maple. Number 15. The show was completely reinvented before it hit TV. The Jim Anderson you remember, calm, patient, always ready with a life lesson and a warm smile, that guy didn't exist until 1954. On the original NBC radio version that launched in 1949, Jim was a very different character. Not softer, rougher. He was sardonic, sharp-tongued, and ran his household like a man who expected to be obeyed. He'd call his own kids names. He'd cut through domestic problems with sarcasm instead of sensitivity. The radio version of Jim Anderson wasn't a lovable fool. He was the guy at the head of the table who made sure everyone knew it. And the title reflected that tension. The show was called Father Knows Best with a question mark, as in, does he though?
And I said, you said you wanted reality. I said, this is life. This happens in life. This happens in families. We know that. So we're going to do it.
That little piece of punctuation was the show openly questioning whether Jim's heavy-handed approach actually made him the authority he thought he was. Then the series jumped to television in 1954 and everything changed. The question mark? Gone. The rough edges? Smoothed out completely. Suddenly, Jim Anderson wasn't barking orders or cutting people down with sarcasm. He was the final word on everything, delivered with patience, warmth, and a tone that made you feel like everything was gonna be fine. Robert Young specifically wanted to avoid making Jim either a bumbling clod or a domineering patriarch. What they landed on was an idealized father who solved problems with quiet wisdom instead of volume. The radio version was the dad who told you to sit down. The TV version was the dad who pulled up a chair and asked what was wrong. And that transformation from sharp and abrasive to warm and aspirational is the reason Father Knows Best became the show America wanted to believe in. Number 14. The show that got canceled, then saved by fans. Father Knows Best premiered in 1954 to solid reviews. Critics called it smart, warm, the kind of show families could actually watch together. One problem? CBS scheduled it at 10 p.m. on Sunday nights. A family show, airing when most of the family was already unconscious. The very audience it was built for couldn't stay awake long enough to find it. Ratings tanked, the sponsor bailed, and after just 13 episodes, CBS pulled the plug. But fans weren't having it. What followed was one of the earliest Save Our Show campaigns in television history. Thousands of letters and postcards flooded the network. Viewers argued this was one of the only shows they could sit down and watch as a family, if someone would just stop burying it in the late-night graveyard. And somehow, it worked. The Scott Paper Company stepped in as a new sponsor, pulled the show over to NBC, and gave it something radical. A time slot people could actually watch, 8:30 p.m. Freed from scheduling purgatory, Father Knows Best exploded into a genuine hit, eventually reaching millions of households and becoming one of the defining shows of the decade. No hashtags, no online petitions, just stamps, stationery, and enough collective stubbornness to drag a canceled sitcom back from the dead. Number 13. The episode that was never meant for TV. In 1959, the U.S. Treasury Department and the American Federation of Labor approached the producers of Father Knows Best with an unusual request. A special episode promoting U.S. savings bonds. What they got was 24 Hours in Tyrant Land, a 30-minute episode that never aired on television. The setup was pure Jim Anderson. He'd been asked to head Springfield's savings bond drive, and Margaret was fully on board. The kids? Not so much. So Jim struck a deal. He gave each of them the cost of a bond and challenged them to survive 24 hours living under Tyrant Land rules. If they couldn't last, they had to buy bonds and help with the drive. Then things escalated. Tyrant Jim taxed their money away, forced them to work, and ran the household like a one-man authoritarian regime. The kids actually made it, all 24 hours, and just when time was up and Betty was heading out the door for her Saturday night date, Jim turned the clock back an hour. They'd survived Tyrant Land. He just moved the finish line, because in Tyrant Land, even time belongs to the ruler. Instead of airing on CBS or NBC, the episode was distributed to schools, churches, and civic groups. On the surface, it was a pitch for savings bonds, but wrapped inside that pitch was a Cold War-era civics lesson about what life looks like when freedom disappears, delivered through the most wholesome family on television. Most sitcoms sold cereal and soap. Father Knows Best sold savings bonds with a side of simulated authoritarianism. Number 12, the most famous TV house you've seen 100 times. The Anderson home at 607 South Maple looked like the most wholesome address in America. Nice lawn, white trim, the kind of house where problems got solved before the second commercial break. What most people never realized is that the house had a longer resume than half the actors who walked through its front door. The facade was built on the Columbia Ranch backlot sometime in the late 1930s or early 1940s, originally for the Blondie film series. After Blondie wrapped, the house just sat there, waiting for its next family. Father Knows Best moved in during the mid-50s, and for 6 seasons, Jim Anderson dispensed fatherly wisdom from that front porch like a human fortune cookie. Then the Andersons left, and the house didn't even have time to cool down. A few years later, same exterior, new family. Now it's Mr. Wilson's place on Dennis the Menace. After that, the house resurfaced as Major Tony Nelson's home on I Dream of Jeannie. Different decade, different show, same front door. And then in 1970, a fire tore through parts of the backlot and destroyed the original structure. But the studio rebuilt it, and the whole street went right back to work. Blondie Street, as the backlot block was known, was home to a whole neighborhood of facades that kept showing up across different decades of television. The Partridge Family, Bewitched, Hazel, The Monkees. Different shows, different families, same block of Hollywood plywood that audiences recognized without even knowing they were looking at the same street. It survived a fire, got rebuilt, and never once got a proper thank you in the credits. Hardest working address in Hollywood, and it never even existed. Number 11, Bud Anderson's wild second life. For 6 seasons, Billy Gray played Bud Anderson, the polite, clean-cut, all-American teenager every 1950s parent wished they had. 2 years after the show ended, Gray was arrested for marijuana possession. In 1962, that wasn't a slap on the wrist, it was a career-altering headline. Gray himself later said the press treated him like this all-American boy turned dope fiend. The leading roles dried up fast. He kept picking up scattered guest spots through the 60s and even came back for 2 Father Knows Best reunion films in 1977. But the trajectory he'd been on, gone. Rather than spend the rest of his life chasing what he'd lost, Gray pivoted hard. By 1970, he'd moved into competitive motorcycle racing. For the next 25 years, he raced Class A Speedway professionally, building a reputation on the track that had nothing to do with television. And that wasn't even his last act. Through his company, Big Rock Engineering, Gray developed the F1 guitar pick, an ergonomic pick designed to grip the player's finger even during sweaty performances. He holds several patents related to both motorcycling and music accessories. And here's the detail that ties the whole thing together. As of his later years, Gray was still living in the same Topanga Canyon home he'd bought in 1957, right in the middle of his Father Knows Best days. Bud Anderson's TV life peaked when Gray was barely in his 20s. Billy Gray's real life was just getting warmed up. Number 10. The first family was fired for not being good enough. When the producers reworked the show after the pilot, everybody got scrapped but the dad. And finding replacements? They weren't casual about it. More than 30 boys read for Bud before they landed on Billy Gray, specifically because he could deliver teenage slang flat, without what Rodney called a "this is a joke see" lit. For Margaret, they needed warmth and authority, which is how they landed on Jane Wyatt, who brought enough quiet strength to win 3 consecutive Emmys. And then there was Kitten. They interviewed 78 girls, and Rodney later said they got dozens of adorable little blondes, but none of them felt right. Then Lauren Chapin came in. Her producer described her as having absolutely no acting experience, though she had appeared briefly on Lux Video Theater in 1952. What stood out was that she felt natural and unpolished, a kid who felt like a kid, not a tiny performer. One full cast replacement and an obsessive attention to tone, all before the show ever aired its first official episode. Engineered from the ground up. Number 9. Girl wants to be an engineer. Show has notes. Most Father Knows Best episodes wrapped up with a warm lesson and a smile. This one wrapped up with a lesson too. It's just that the lesson aged like an open carton of milk. In Betty, Girl Engineer, which aired in April 1956, Betty signs up through her school's vocational program to job shadow an engineer over spring break. Not a secretary, not a homemaker, an actual engineer. And from the moment she brought it home, she heard exactly the kind of things you'd expect to hear in 1956. From her brother, from her mother, from her father. The message from all of them, delivered in different ways, was the same. This isn't for you. Then comes the job site. Her boss, Doyle Hobbs, keeps questioning why she's there, belittling her at every turn until she gives up and walks home. And just when it looks like the episode might challenge that thinking, it pivots. Doyle shows up at the Anderson house with a box of chocolate. He explains to Jim that boys want to be engineers so they can work hard and come home to girls that remind them of their mothers. And if girls start becoming engineers, then what's the point? Betty overhears the whole thing, runs upstairs, changes into a dress, comes back down, and agrees to go on a date with him. Roll credits. But here's the part the show's writers probably didn't expect. The Society of Women Engineers pushed back immediately. One member called it detrimental, to say the least, to engineering as a profession for women, warning that a single program seen by millions may have undone years of progress. So even in 1956, not everyone was laughing along. Jim Anderson could solve anything in 22 minutes, but apparently his daughter wanting a career wasn't a problem. It was the answer that needed fixing. Number 8. The future TV dad who got his start in Springfield. A decade before Robert Reed became the most patient father at a house full of 6 kids and a housekeeper, he was just another unknown actor trying to get noticed. His real name was John Robert Reitz. He'd been born in the Chicago suburbs but raised in Oklahoma, trained at Northwestern and the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art in London, and worked his way through New York theater. In 1959, he made his television debut, a guest spot on Father Knows Best. Not one of his early roles, his first. The very first time Robert Reed appeared on a television screen, it was inside the Anderson family's living room. He played Mr. Cameron, a character who gets tangled up in a case of mistaken identity while courting Betty Anderson. It wasn't a star-making turn. It was a solid, forgettable guest credit, the kind of thing that shows up on an IMDb page and nobody thinks twice about it. 2 years later, Reed landed a starring role on The Defenders, a critically acclaimed legal drama where he played half of a father-son defense attorney team alongside E.G. Marshall. And then in 1969, everything changed permanently. He became Mike Brady on The Brady Bunch, the calm, unflappable dad who managed a blended family of 8 without ever raising his voice. Which makes that 1959 guest spot hit differently in hindsight. The guy who'd go on to become the defining TV dad of the 1970s made his very first television appearance on the show that defined the TV dad of the 1950s. Springfield produced The Andersons, then quietly auditioned their replacement. Quick pause. If you're enjoying this trip through the Anderson family's weirdest moments, hit that like button and subscribe. It helps us keep these retro deep dives coming every week. And let us know in the comments, do you remember watching Father Knows Best? Or did you discover it later on reruns? Did it feel comforting? Or did it feel like a transmission from another planet? Alright, back to the house with the picket fence. Number 7. The Girl America Loved and the Life She Was Living Off Camera. For 6 seasons, Kathy Kitten Anderson was the baby of the family. Protected, adored, and wrapped in the safest home on television. Lauren Chapin's actual life looked nothing like that. In interviews and in her 1989 memoir, Father Does Know Best, Chapin described a childhood marked by abuse, including sexual abuse by her father and a mother who left her behind to pursue her brother's acting career in New York.
She'd been sexually abused by her father as a toddler. Her parents divorced. She was physically and emotionally abused by an alcoholic mother.
By the age of 11, she later said, she had already attempted suicide. She told interviewers it was almost impossible to reconcile being Kathy Anderson on screen while living a completely different reality at home. When Father Knows Best ended in 1960, that safety net vanished. 5 months after the finale, she made one last television appearance on General Electric Theater, and then didn't act again for 16 years. She dropped out of high school as a junior. She fell into a relationship that led to a heroin addiction, which she said lasted 7 years. In 1967, she was arrested for check forgery and served a 3-year sentence. But that's not where the story ends. After achieving sobriety in 1979, Chapin rebuilt from the ground up. She became a licensed evangelist and ordained minister. She became a founding board member of A Minor Consideration, the nonprofit dedicated to protecting child actors. And she reconnected with the world that first knew her as Kitten, writing her memoir, appearing on True Hollywood Story, and showing up at reunion events with an honesty that made people listen. 6 seasons of television gave her a perfect childhood. Real life took it away. And she spent the rest of her years making sure other kids didn't pay the same price. Number 6. The Episodes That Vanished. Father Knows Best produced 203 episodes, but not all of them survived, because a handful quietly disappeared from circulation, and for decades, some were considered gone for good. Most of the missing episodes were clip shows, the kind where the Andersons sat around reflecting on old memories while editors stitched together highlights from earlier seasons. When the series hit syndication, distributors realized viewers might see the same footage twice in the same week. The solution? Pull those episodes entirely, and in some cases, reportedly dispose of them. 11 of the 13 missing episodes were flashback shows that distributors decided wouldn't work outside their original broadcast context. But it wasn't just clip shows. 2 original episodes also slipped through the cracks. Stage to Yuma from Season 2, and a final season installment called Not His Type. For years, collectors treated them like television ghosts, rumored to exist, rarely confirmed. Then the recovery started. When Shout Factory was assembling the Season 1 DVD set in 2008, they couldn't locate a lost episode called The Promised Playhouse. A collector in Dallas read about the search, realized he had a 16mm print in his personal collection, and loaned it for inclusion. Stage to Yuma was eventually recovered and released on the Season 2 DVD set. The fate of Not His Type is less clear. The headline originals have been found, but some of those 11 flashback episodes may still be out there, or they may be gone for good. It took decades and a guy in Dallas with a film canister to start filling in the gaps. Number 5. The man who always had the answers was fighting his own battle. Robert Young built an entire career on being the guy everyone trusted. Then came Dr. Marcus Welby on Marcus Welby, MD. Compassionate, steady, always with the right diagnosis. 2 decades of playing the men America leaned on when things got hard. Behind the camera, Young was carrying something he rarely talked about for years. He later said his depression began in 1946 and lasted 45 years. For much of his adult life, he battled with both severe clinical depression and alcoholism. Even while playing the man with all the answers, he was dealing with struggles most viewers never saw. By the early 1980s, Young had started speaking publicly about his fight with alcoholism. In a 1983 interview, he described the recovery process as immensely difficult, recounting how he slipped back repeatedly before making a breakthrough. He entered Alcoholics Anonymous and often held meetings in his own home. In 1991, it reached a breaking point. Young attempted suicide. By that point, he was also battling Alzheimer's disease and heart problems. But that wasn't the final chapter. Young continued to speak candidly about his struggles in an effort to encourage others to seek help. He recovered, with the support of his wife Elizabeth, and through a combination of AA and spiritual practices. And his impact went beyond interviews. The Robert Young Center for Community Mental Health in Rock Island, Illinois, was named in his honor for his work toward passage of a statewide referendum that established dedicated funding for mental health programs. Jim Anderson solved every problem in 22 minutes. Robert Young's took a lifetime, and the real version mattered more. Number 4. The show that found a second life on cable. For most Gen X kids, Father Knows Best wasn't something they discovered on purpose. It was something they stumbled into while flipping channels on a weeknight because there was nothing else on and the remote was too far away. A show their parents grew up with accidentally became part of their childhood too. In the 1980s, superstation WTBS started running Father Knows Best in its classic TV rotation. Then, in the 1990s, the Family Channel picked it up. Later, TV Land picked it up in 1998, dropped it, and then brought it back again in the early 2000s. Across 3 networks in 2 decades, the show just kept finding its way back onto the schedule. And for a generation of kids raised on Alf and Growing Pains, the Andersons were a weird but strangely comforting detour. The pacing was slower, the problems were smaller, nobody was yelling. Parents recognized it instantly. The kids had never seen a single frame of it, and somehow both groups ended up watching it together. A show that originally aired when Eisenhower was in office somehow became part of the Gen X childhood experience. Not because anyone sought it out, but because cable TV needed content and somebody had the rights. It just kept showing up until it belonged to a whole new generation. Number 3. How Father Knows Best accidentally helped create Springfield. The Anderson family lived in a place called Springfield, a name so generic, so deliberately ordinary, that it barely registered as a fictional town. That was the point. It could be anywhere, your town, your neighbor's town, every town. Decades later, that quiet creative decision ended up influencing one of the biggest shows in television history. Matt Groening grew up in Portland, Oregon, and watched Father Knows Best as a kid. There's a real Springfield in Oregon, close enough that the young Groening assumed the Andersons were basically his neighbors.
But it gave people a sense of hope. It gave people a sense of, I'm going to have my life like Jim and Margaret Anderson.
It wasn't until years later that he realized the name was never meant to be a real place at all. It was a deliberate blank. Anytown, USA by design. And that idea stuck with him. When Groening created The Simpsons, he needed a hometown for the most dysfunctional family in animation history. He wanted a town so generic that every viewer could project their own hometown onto it. So he grabbed the same name, Springfield, and turned it into one of the longest-running jokes in the show's history. The Simpsons has dropped dozens of contradictory clues about which state Springfield is in, and none of them add up. It's nowhere and everywhere at the same time. And here's the detail that makes the whole thing even better. Springfield wasn't just a convenient generic name. It's genuinely the most commonplace name in the United States. There are Springfields in over 30 states. 2 completely different shows. 2 completely different families. One endlessly useful town name that somehow never gets old. The Andersons would probably be proud. Homer would probably just ask where the nearest Krusty Burger is. Number 2. The Anderson family became sci-fi royalty. The Andersons spent 6 seasons in the safest, most grounded setting on television. A quiet suburban home where the biggest crisis was a misunderstanding at the dinner table. So how did the cast of America's most wholesome family end up scattered across the galaxy? It started with Jane Wyatt. In 1967, America's perfect mom showed up on Star Trek as Amanda Grayson, the human mother of Spock. Audiences already associated Wyatt with maternal warmth, so watching her guide one of Sci-Fi's most complex characters felt completely natural. She reprised the role in Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home, and later said that while she still received fan mail for Father Knows Best and her classic film Lost Horizon, the Star Trek mail just kept growing. Complete strangers would approach her calling her Amanda, a name she played for exactly 2 productions. Margaret Anderson raised 3 kids in Springfield. Amanda Grayson raised a Vulcan on a distant planet. Wyatt played both like it was the same job. Then Elinor Donahue crossed over, showing up in the Star Trek episode Metamorphosis as Commissioner Nancy Hedford, a high-ranking Federation official with a storyline that goes to some genuinely strange sci-fi places. And then there's Billy Gray. Before he ever played Bud Anderson, Gray appeared in the 1951 classic The Day the Earth Stood Still as Bobby Benson, the young boy who befriends an alien visitor. His sci-fi credentials actually predate Father Knows Best entirely. The safest family on television somehow ended up in the most unpredictable genre in entertainment, and every single one of them fit right in. Number 1. The cast killed the show on purpose, walking away at the top. Here's something that almost never happened in 1950s television. The people making Father Knows Best deliberately chose to end it while it was still a hit. By 1960, the show was pulling in solid ratings, finishing number 6 in the Nielsen rankings, its highest placement ever. Robert Young, Jane Wyatt, and producer Eugene Rodney had already decided they've told every story worth telling. When a writer's strike hit in early 1960 and shut down production, they used the moment to make it permanent. The reason wasn't burnout, it was logic. The kids had grown up. Betty was old enough to get married. Bud was old enough to ship off to college. And Young and Rodney knew that scattering the Anderson family would destroy the very thing the show was built on. Not on any single character, but the relationships between all of them. Once that was gone, there was no show left worth making. So they walked away, on purpose, while the show was working. In an era when networks would squeeze a hit show until the wheels came off, when the cast members were locked into contracts and seasons kept getting ordered whether the writers had material or not, the team behind Father Knows Best made the almost unheard of decision to quit while they were ahead. Most shows from this era ran until the ratings cratered and the audience had already mentally moved on. Father Knows Best chose the door before anyone could escort him out. The Andersons left Springfield with their dignity fully intact, which honestly tracks. Jim Anderson would have absolutely insisted on it. And there you have it. 15 weird facts about the show that taught America how a family was supposed to behave, even when the people making it were living proof that nobody actually had it figured out. So which one caught you off guard? Drop it in the comments. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this with whoever you used to watch reruns with. They probably need this trip down memory lane just as much as you do. Until next time, this is Remember When.